Right, guys, I'm going to start. Just because there's a lot of interviews to get through, and there's lots of clips and all sorts of stuff that's happened. And I've gone through it on my own, very, very briefly, and we have just the right amount of time. So I just don't want to like delay it and then keep everyone over their lunch. So yeah, this is a silly little thing that will make sense in a minute, but if you've done that, it'd be quite interesting to see what people's results are. But it's something that they used to do in the 90s. I'll talk about it in a bit, but cool. So I just want to talk about kind of how I work and the different ways that I work as a neurodiverse person. As a designer, I'm quite organized, and I have these kind of systems in place which work quite well. And I think it's linked to like my early kind of career where I have to work on a server with other people. So when you leave a piece of design, you have to leave it so that if you're off the next kind of week, then another designer can pick it up, and you become quite organized in your approach, and you have these kind of like systematic ways of working, and it works really, really well for design. And it's like a thing that just kind of makes sense, and it complements the way that I approach my whole design process. And I like to be able to find things really, really easily. So this is how I work as a designer, but this is how I work in reality. And I am chaotic. And the current role that I'm in, which is a lecturer, it's really, really bitty. And when I'm working, I feel like my head, you might have heard this metaphor before, but I feel like my head is a browser, and I have 1,000 tabs open, which I actually always do have 1,000 tabs open. Sometimes there's no icons, and that's how many I get to. And there are nearly 2,000 things on my desktop. And I don't, when I'm in a certain tab, that's the tab I'm in, and all the other tabs I can't see. And I think this is quite common with neurodivergence. So people can think very, very like strictly about a certain subject, but as soon as they move into the next tab, that subject doesn't really exist anymore, which is really, it complements being a designer quite well. But yeah, I feel like my head's always 1,000 tabs deep. So yeah, this isn't a design presentation, so it makes me feel a bit nervous because I like to have things really well designed, and I'm just being really, really stripped back because it has to be quite functional. There's no revelations in this, so we're not going to probably learn a lot of new things, but it's really lovely to hear what the neurodiverse community in the design industry are talking about, and just nice to hear other people that think the same way as us, I think. I quite like that anyway. So 48 people got in touch, and I got in touch in July. 48 people got in touch and said, I'd like to be in your lecture. And then there are also 48 neurodivergent people. So they didn't reply to my emails, most of them. But I thought it was quite interesting that so many people were willing to just give up their time and come on calls with me. I had 10 calls, and 2 of them didn't record sound, which is just so annoying. I didn't really know what I was doing. I've never recorded interviews before, and I just didn't hit record on the sound, apparently. So there's 2.5 hours of me and this person these 2 people just like miming to each other, which I think is quite funny. I might put that as a kind of, I don't know, ASMR thing on YouTube one day. So one of the things that started me on this kind of journey a long time ago was I wanted to write a book, and I'm still in the process of writing this bloody book. But the thing that used to really like piss me off actually is when people say, isn't it amazing that all of these people have done well, even though they have some kind of neurodivergent condition? And it really grinds me, because I'm like, when you think about it in a different way, it's actually quite likely because of their neurodivergence that they've got this kind of ability to focus, ability to kind of get really in the weeds on certain things. And I think a much better way, you're looking at people like Kendrick Lamar and like there's all sorts of people out there, Whoopi Goldberg, Sia, Billie Eilish, there's people with OCD, there's people with ADHD, ASD, all sorts of things going on. And they're all unbelievably successful. I worked out one year that all of the top 5 richest people in the world are all neurodiverse, which is like, oh, wonder how they did that. I don't know. Anyway, I just think it's interesting. So yeah, I'm not an expert. Just because I am neurodivergent doesn't make me an expert in this at all. I just like talking to people, so it's a collection of stories, really. I occasionally struggle with the correct wording. I'm quite open. I just talk, and sometimes the wrong things come out. So I am sorry about that if that happens. These are their own words and my own words. They're not representative of the university as a whole, but like it's just it's nice to hear what other people have to say, I think. We don't speak for everybody, so their experiences are their own experiences. And yeah, it's not always specific to neurodivergence. Like these are things that maybe everybody in the room relates to, even though they're not very stereotypically neurodivergent traits. So everybody, even neurotypical people, will relate to a lot of this stuff. So just a couple of things. I know you know all of these, but neurodivergent is a thing that people use to say about people who diverge out of the kind of stereotypical way of thinking. And then neurotypical are people who are in line, which is actually only 4 in 5 people, which kind of makes it not that divergent anyway. But and then neurodiverse, which is quite often what people use to say I'm neurodiverse, is actually not probably the right term. So neurodiverse is like diversity. So you have neurodiverse working places, so which has got a diverse group of people thinking in lots of different ways. So that includes neurotypical and neurodivergent people. But people use those interchangeably anyway. So this is them. If I'm not going to talk about them all because there's some complicated ones on there, but if you want to take a picture and you don't know them all, then you can research them later. This will be recorded anyway, but the last set are slightly more complex and they're maybe lesser known, some of them. This is interesting. I found this a long time ago when I went to a talk with my wife, and this person who has a PhD talking about neurodiversity, like showed this, a version of this is my own version of it, but how all of them kind of link to each other in a certain way. And there's like correlations between them, which are traits. And I just really like this. And quite often ADHD people have an element of dyslexia. And actually there's something called ADHD, which maybe not everybody would know, but ADHD is autism and ADHD together. And they're on opposite ends. But that quite often means that they have a group of things that are going on as well. So it's just interesting to see the things. So like with ADHD and dyslexia, quite often the thing that they have in common is authenticity in the way that they communicate. And yeah, I think they're pretty, like honesty with autism and dyspraxia. Quite often there's an honesty in there as well, so there's lots of kind of overlap. Yeah, in society, 15 to 20% of people are neurodivergent. And what's really interesting is that 50% of the creative community are neurodivergent. So if you work in an agency, it's likely that 1 in 2 people are neurodivergent, which makes them not that divergent in a lot of ways. What that's quite nice is if you are neurodivergent, it's quite nice to know that the industry you're going into is quite supportive and quite forward thinking, whereas maybe something like finance might not be so much in that direction, there's going to be industries that aren't so up to date and they're maybe behind a little bit. This is me when I was 13. And this is a report I got when I was 10. And I'm not going to read them all, but you can take a picture if you like, but if you're interested. But some of the things in my report when I was 10 years old were pretty damning, actually. And they all had an element of must concentrate more, must be less silly, must whatever. I kind of found this funny at first when I went back to read them. And then I just got really sad about it. And I remember just thinking, this is actually just horrible. And I realized that a lot of my issues that I have now link right back to when I was a student, when I had teachers that were just cruel in a lot of ways. I mean, this is a report from my German teacher, which you can barely read, but I'll read the last line. I'm afraid that in class, Jamie is fatally handicapped in his extreme immaturity and being so easily led, which is not, in my opinion, the way you should be talking to a 10-year-old child. It's something that happened a lot in the 90s and before. And I think one of the really lovely things is that it's started to shift and change. This comes up a lot with first years when I talk to them. There was a girl called Charlotte who graduated last year who was the best student in the year, pretty much, one of the best students in the year. And she had this really low self-esteem. And so one day, I just thought, I'm just going to ask her and why. And I spoke to her and her friends, and she had no idea why she was not very confident. And you might have heard this story before, I might have talked to you about it, but then her friend said, oh, it's that teacher. And I was like, I knew it was going to be a teacher. And the teacher had basically said, when she said she wants to go to university, that she wasn't clever enough. And then she went, well, I'm going to art school. And you went, you can't even draw, and laughed at her. And it affected her for the rest of her life. And luckily, she was quite well supported here by the year 1 team, but then going into graphics with graphic comms with Amy and Martin and Andy as well. Like, she had the best 3 years. She just loved being at university. And it was really nice to hear that it was so bad, but then she kind of built it up and won lots of competitions and all sorts of stuff. But it usually starts with neurodivergent people at school level when they get their kind of insecurity. So it's important to kind of work through that stuff get over it as soon as you can, really. I'm probably still not completely over the way my German teacher talked to me, but anyway, this is Melin, and she's kind of talking about her tricky education experience, which I just think is quite an interesting topic.
What I remember is that I genuinely couldn't listen. If I had to listen, I was falling asleep, and so I figured out ways of sleeping without being noticed. So that was like my achievement. I copied. Like I did not get, there were certain lessons that just did not stick with me, like geometry, physics, chemistry, maths just did not ever work for me. The only lesson I could do is that, and thanks to my teacher, somehow I figured out that if I am actively doing something, I will understand it. So it was history, he'll make me stand up and write everything that's being said on the board throughout every lesson, because otherwise I was probably too disruptive and like not listening, not taking notes, talking to everyone. So he was like, and you've got a good handwriting. So he was like, just like, you'll be writing everything. And that's the only way I kind of understand history, like did good on history. Yeah, so it was hard.
So yeah, I mean, that sounds quite kind of punitive to me, actually. It doesn't sound like a very nice experience, but it helped her actually to have that teacher that kind of forced her to write on the board. But yeah, anyway, difficult experiences usually start at early education. This is the thing that I just got you guys to kind of like sign and whatever, do this thing. It's a silly little thing I made. I thought it was, but it's a thing that they used to do in the 90s. They used to make you kind of punch in all these details, and you got this like dot matrix printout of like how, what all the jobs that you could do. And I got 2 jobs that I was going to be good at. And it was a mechanic or working in a factory. And I was like, repetitive subject, like repetitive like stuff in a factory does not suit my brain in any way. I don't know where they got that from. And I've never shown an interest in cars. One of the things that is kind of like stupid about me is if I'm not interested in something, I am so not interested. When I had Martin, who Martin used to be in our office, and he's, you know, our manager, and he asked me like what was wrong with my car, and I said, oh, there's something wrong with the head gasket, whatever that is. And he went, what kind of car have you got? And I went, oh, it's like a Ford Nissan or something like this. And he was like, what are you talking about? A Ford Nissan? I have such little interest in cars that I didn't know they were 2 different makes of car. And then they said to me that I should probably be a mechanic. I mean, this is like the epitome of teachers not listening to children. And what I actually wanted to be, I wanted to work for GCHQ. I wanted to be a spy, but that was never going to happen. I would have sold state secrets. But yeah, so what's really lovely about meeting you guys, every year we get like fresh people all the time. And last year we had somebody who, when I just chatted to her for a bit, and she said she'd built a car from scratch, which might be in the room. But she just built a car from scratch. And I was like, what? That's crazy. I can't even imagine that. We've had like professional gamers that are late for crits because they've been at an esports event, like YouTubers that have got 1 million subscribers, athletes, people with like super famous dads. And like, this is Anmar as well, who is now a really successful artist, but dropped out of graphic comms, which is just like wild. We've got a student that might be in the room, I don't know, but he gets kicked out of the fast lane of swimming pools because he's too fast. I just love that. Told me that once. He was like, yeah, I can't go to swimming pools unless I hire it out, because he swam for county and all sorts of stuff. And every time I see him, by the way, he's always smoking outside, which I think is quite funny. Yeah. So I quite like this question. I think it's worth always asking like what you would have been. And this is something that I asked all of the people that I interviewed because I knew what the answer would be, and it's just quite vibrant. So yeah, this is 3 people talking about what they would have been. If you weren't a designer, what do you think you would be?
Marine biologist.
Oh, for real?
Yes.
Wow. Oh, that's
So my intersection where like I would define my design is strongest is actually in the product design research division, even though I do a lot more branding stuff.
Yeah.
So science and research has always been super important to me, even when I was like a little kid, and I was in love with marine life. So I actually had a choice between becoming a marine biologist or a designer. Yeah.
Do you think you've ever kind of thought, oh, what would it have been like if I'd have gone down the other route?
I would have to do a lot more math.
Okay, yeah.
I think the The one thing that I keep coming back to is I've always been fascinated by how charcoal is made. I love being outdoors, and I think if I had enough money to retire and just needed something to do, I'd be making charcoal in a small clearing of woodland somewhere and selling it for an extortionate amount of money.
Recently, in the last 2 years, I started thinking I would like to be a behavioral scientist.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense being in the UX bit, doesn't it? And yeah, good. That's a great answer.
And I was just really interested in people. Sorry to cut you off. I didn't know how much I love people and studying people and hearing about stories and, like putting together patterns. So now I know, and I would have loved to do that.
By the way, I've learned to not cut people off because that was like my early interviews, which didn't record. I was constantly just like and cutting everyone off. So I've got quite good at like not talking over people, which is good for an ADHD person. But yeah, marine biology, charcoal, and behavioral science are like mad. I love that. But this is the community you're all going to end up working in, and almost everybody you talk to has some interesting stories. Like there's nothing boring about the creative community. But yeah, so look forward to it. What's really nice about it as well is when you are a designer, no matter what area you work in, you get these kind of niche problems that you're like, I didn't know like that I would be learning about this. When I was a student, I worked on Swatch, and I was kind of like, I love working on Swatch and whiskey and eco products, and I was like, these are my things. And then as soon as I graduated, I was like, Liz Earle, what on earth is Liz Earle? And it's like this middle-aged skincare stuff, and I was like, so I have to now be reading on Mumsnet, and I have to like go and like overhear conversations on the tube of women talking to each other about skincare and stuff. And I was trying my hardest to become an expert in botanics and like cleanse and polish and all these weird things that I had to learn. And I'd never used skincare in my life. And but I learned about it and I got quite fascinated by it. And this is what's lovely about being a designer, and makes you quite interesting at weddings as well, because you can basically just talk to anyone. But yeah, this is James talking about this.
But I think at the same time, I have a deep curiosity for everything. So it's a really good environment to be in the creative industry, or to have the ability to go kind of start things where you have to think creatively, and are forced to be curious to a certain extent. You can't come up with a brand identity for someone, or packaging for someone, or any creative solution for someone until you kind of always understand the brand as well as the brand owners or the founders do. You have to kind of live it. The fantastic thing about being in the creative industry and being neurodiverse is that opportunity can come up once a month, or sometimes once a week. Another door is opened for you to learn something about whether it's a toothbrush, or a craft beer, or a banking system, or a new car, or a charity project for allotments working down the road from you. All of those is an opportunity for you to walk into someone else's environment and go, tell me. Yeah. And finding out new stuff. And that's kind of massively rewarding for a neurodivergent brain. But I think I'm stunned by people who aren't curious.
I love that line he said, like, I'm stunned by people who aren't curious. What a thing to finish on as well. I'm also stunned by that. And yeah, it's just lovely to hear. And this kind of like, especially with stereotypical presentations of like ASD or ADHD, this kind of like focus that you can have is really satisfying as a designer. This is Brett, who works for Lego. And I asked him about his lifelong kind of hobby I actually cut it much shorter because I was talking a lot in this one, but because I just love talking to Brett. But about collecting toys, he collects toys on quite a serious level.
Do you think it's linked, like your love for toys? Because that's what I've known about you forever. Is that because you've got this since you were a kid, haven't you?
Yeah, I said it. Yeah, it's definitely linked. Yeah, I think that was probably one of the main things that made me start questioning my neurodivergence. I think there was a point kind of with my Godzilla toys and everything else where it was like, there was a lot of them, and I was kind of like hyper focused on it. And every time anyone talks about passions at work, it kind of just comes into the conversation, and I do talk about it for days. So it's kind of, that made me kind of link those. As I was younger, I obviously didn't really realize that probably was that kind of working in the background. But yeah, as an adult, I've definitely realized that linked to it. And I think that kind of, all the information on it as well, like I just love kind of going down these rabbit holes and finding out about the history of these toys, kind of all the variants available. And yeah, I can feel it kind of soothing my brain as I do it. So it's definitely linked.
I love that. Again, it always finish on something really cool. Soothing my brain. I love like using research to soothe my brain. Which for some people, research is like a really stressful, annoying thing you have to do. Some people, it's like, oh, I love it. Like, makes me feel good about myself. So yeah, I'm just going to talk really quickly about like my career path, only because like I think it highlights something that neurodivergent like career path might look like. So when I was 13, I was a football boot cleaner. I got off the school bus and I walked into the butcher's, of all places. I was vegetarian, and said, "Can you give me a job?" And they were like, "No." But he said, "Oh, you can clean my boots before every football game, and I'll give you £1 for every goal I score." And I was like, "That's really cool. I'm going to be rich." And yeah, so I did that for a while, and I earned £7 in my first game. He scored 7 goals. That's great, probably due to my clean boots. Then I worked in the Littlewoods Cafe. I'm just going to put this up as well. Impulsiveness is like a theme in my career. Yeah, I swore at an old man on my first shift because he was like annoyed with where I was putting the beans, and I just told him to go F himself. And so don't put me in front of that. I realized quite quickly like that area of work is just not for me. Plant pot washer. I did work in a factory for a day. Got fired from that as well. Yeah, I was bored. I was so bored. And I was like, I just started pushing them past. I'm not cleaning these pots. Didn't last very long. I might have lasted 2 days in that one. Window telesales. So at college, I was trying to sell windows, and they had this kind of whole big thing up where you're like, how many windows each person sold. I was the only person on the board. It was like school. I had no windows below my name. And then I just started ringing my girlfriend. I rang her, and I just chatted to her on the phone for the whole time. So yeah, I got fired from that job. And then I was an apprentice inventor. That was quite a fun job. I lived in someone's bus in their garden and got taught how to invent. It was quite good fun. I only invented one thing though, but he invented loads of really cool stuff. Yeah, then what else did I do? So yeah, my mum ran a mental health, like a psychiatric care unit. I worked there for a bit. That was quite good fun. Tree surgery groundsman. I did that. I chopped trees down because I liked the idea of using a chainsaw. Which is obviously like dumb. Artist assistant. So the same guy was an artist, quite a well-known artist called Ben Patz Mills, and I was his assistant. But that usually just meant that I'd sand all of his sculptures, which is kind of boring. But I lived in a like a handmade tent for a year with a fire, and just lived in a wood yard. And so obviously like quite weird. Festival setup. So I did that for a while. Painter decorator in Cambridge. That was quite boring, but got paid a lot of money. Capoeira teacher, I still do that occasionally. Eating disorder specialist. I worked in the Eating Disorders Association for a couple of years, and I was just calling people, talking to people about eating disorders, young people. I left that very abruptly because somebody died, and it kind of slightly ruined me. And then I started designing when I wasn't leaving my house. That's how I became a designer. But yeah, then I became a charity trustee for another eating disorders place, and I helped them set up a youth service. I was a play ranger, whatever that is. And then I became a designer, and it took me all of those kind of weird steps to get to the point where I was like, oh, I'm a designer. And then I obviously stopped that. Well, I haven't fully stopped it, but I stopped being a full-time designer in 2017 or 18. And now I'm a lecturer. Also the best job, as I put there. It's a very good, fun job. So yeah, this is Ali talking about her kind of negative experience with managers, which I just think is worth talking about. So I'm just going to let her talk.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest sort of problems that I see in every agency I've ever worked in is that people get promoted into roles that they don't have the skill set for just because it's the natural progression. They've been somewhere a certain amount of time. They're really good at being a senior designer. Then they get promoted into a sort of design director role, but actually they've got no people management skills whatsoever. And they're just, just kind of expected to know how to do it or be good at it. And it's like, it absolutely is one of the worst things that I've experienced of people being in director roles who absolutely should not be in director roles because they don't have the skill set. And I think it's that thing of like, actually, you know, it's okay not to be good at those things. Like, again, like if you think about, you know, there's a lot of potential for autistic people to struggle with those things. Like, although, and that kind of leans more into the stereotypical like presentation of autism. Whereas for me, it's what I'm really good at. The pastoral side is always been something I've been really strong at, and I've always really it's been really important to me. And so it can go either way, but it's like, I think for me, it's like we should really be setting people up for success and acknowledging that you don't just like through, you know, longevity of you know, time in the business, you don't just like suddenly learn how to manage people.
I think this is quite important. Like when you get into a role, people at Norwich do well. That's just a thing. Like, and a lot of people end up designing, you know, being design directors or creative directors, or even running your own company in a few years. And you're going to be managing neurodiverse teams, people who are neurotypical, people who are neurodivergent. And it's important, even if you're not neurodivergent, to understand that people think in a slightly different way. So you could be more impulsive. People can get bored quite easily. It can be quite distracted. They can be quite distracted, sensitive. Definitely, I'm sensitive, restless, overthinking. That's another thing that I'm very well known for. Paranoid. They can be quite intense, forgetful. Sometimes people can be really direct and literal as well, and that can be quite tricky in crits sometimes. So there's all of these things that are worth kind of remembering for when you get to the stage where you're managing neurodiverse teams and trying to nurture an environment that doesn't kind of lean into making it difficult for people who are neurodivergent. And also remembering that there are also a lot of things that these aren't only linked to people with neurodivergent conditions, but like being creative, being innovative, very, very curious, hyper-focused. Sometimes that can be hard for the person, but it's amazing for a design team when someone can hyper-focus on something. Very passionate, very, very honest, often very honest. Empathetic. The resilience from like growing up in a world where a lot of things are against them, they build up quite a strong resilience. Very original, intuitive, all of these things anyway. Analytical. I think also you can look at other things like analytical is like a slightly different take on overthinking. I don't know, they're all slightly different takes on the slightly negative take in the previous slide. So anyway. So yeah, James was quite let down by education, and he decided like he didn't really want to go to university, but he's still really successful. So this is him talking about that.
Oh yeah, I think all of my school reports said must try harder.
Yeah.
Because it didn't look like I gave a shit in class, and it's like I wasn't forming being a model student, but then I'd get really good results in tests, and they were just kind of constantly frustrated. There's kind of, you know, James needs to be more present in class. And it's like, do I? Because I'm kind of getting B's and A's and stuff. So why, if the output is expected, so why change the input? And then towards the end of, by kind of year 9, I was getting frustrated with the education process because it was too conformist, too kind of, I have to be the model student and not looking at the results. So I checked out. And then by year 10, I was on report, and I'd had to go to the headmaster twice a week and sign a statement that said I will be a compliant student, which just made me push it against it even more. I just got more and more frustrated with it. So by the time I was at sixth form and a similar sort of pattern was emerging, I'd just skip lessons and go down the pub.
Yeah.
And just feel equally frustrated and an outcast to a certain extent. And I was part of a group of kind of metalhead and indie kids. So we were kind of slightly outcast anyway, but then from a social level. But then at an educational level, I felt more disillusioned with the whole process. the more and more they try to make you conform, the more of a dramatic reaction there'd be.
I actually think he would have done quite well at university, but like he's got a great career already, so he didn't need that. And this is Emily. Emily suffers from quite severe anxiety, but you would never know. You would never know if you knew her. So yeah, she had a different experience with education.
And I got a job at that time as well, which I think helped force me into like different interactions. I was cashier at Waitrose, and that was really scary. Like I was so stressed going to work for months. It took me months to like not feel terrified. But I think it helped just push me into like it's fine sitting on a till and chatting to people. So then, but by the time it came to uni, I was feeling like a lot less anxious and a lot like more confident. So going into uni was really, really great. And like, I'd come on like miles. Like I was really confident. Like I remember like the first week of being there, I would just like chat to random people, which was like really incredible. But then I think all the years of like being so anxious and so stressed, like didn't really go away. I was still like sort of stressed and anxious, but I was really pushing myself to like not really care. But unfortunately, it did all sort of catch up to me in my first year. I did year zero at uni, so my first year was the year zero. And it did all like pile on. And I had like a bit of a bout of depression for about 3 months in year zero. And that's when I like actually got like proper help addressing that and also the anxiety. And then, yeah, from then on, it's just something that's sort of like up and down really, but generally under control.
So yeah, I love that she had a good experience of university in particular, and then also the university services that you all have access to, which when you graduate, you don't have access to those. So it's just like, if this is something that you struggle with, then I think it is also worth always just using our services that we offer here. So yeah, I don't want to go through all of the people's conversations about this because we don't have time, but these were my observations from the general conversations that I was having. And they were things like, yeah, everybody seemed to have some kind of struggle with academia at some point, quite often early years, but also sometimes at university. Everybody had anxiety around the education experience. So even in crits or meetings or calls or whatever it is, they all had a similar thing going on. Everybody got through it. And also everyone who used those services, everyone who said that they used the services that the schools or the university offered felt so much better afterwards. So it's just a thing that I think is worth recognizing because you're at the stage now where you do have access to this stuff. So yeah, anyway, that's all I'll say on that. So entering the industry, this is Ben Tobe again talking about, well, I'll just let him talk. He's talking about COVID and how that changed his way of working.
I used to think of myself as a bit of a chameleon. Like I'd go into a space and sort of mirror what was going on around me. So when I first started in the industry, that meant going to the pub after work, pretty much like just following the crowd. Like, what is everybody doing? Okay, I'm going to get involved and do the same thing. That wasn't actually good for me mentally because I wasn't being who I was. I was just mirroring everyone around me and being like, this is how we do it. I also had people telling me that, like people on my level saying, Ben, if you want to get ahead, you need to be going to the pub after work. You need to be like talking to like the people who are higher up. You need to be doing, and I was like, I don't really want to. I want my work to speak for myself. I don't want to play with those codes of, who did I get matey with at the pub? Like, there's nothing wrong with being matey at the pub, and that's absolutely fine. But I don't want that to be what defines, like, am I a good designer? I want my design to decide that. I want someone to look at my work and go, fuck, that's good work. Like, good job. I don't want someone to say, like, well, I spoke to you in the pub, so I'm going to put you on that project. Like, that's an old way of working, and it doesn't work for me. And advocating for myself early on, I just didn't do. Because partially there was the power of denial. There was this is who I am. This is, yeah, I do go to the pub. I go and do these things. I'm always out. I'm always doing this stuff. There was that kind of armor of being like, well, there's nothing, I'm not different. I'm the same as everybody else. COVID made me first question that. But then being with a partner who was actively going through that kind of conversation and figuring that out about themselves, it inspired me.
So some good things did come out of COVID, which is, completely different working conditions, which is much more flexible and much more neurodivergent friendly, I think now. Yeah, when I was in the industry, these were like my evening offices. Pretty much every evening I would be, or every lunchtime as well, we'd be in the pub. And it is a bit of a dated way of working, but it helped me in my career. But it isn't a healthy way of working. It's not great because like I used to get quite anxious about going to the pub, even though it was with my friends. And it was like, and as soon as I was there and I'd had a pint, I'd be chill and it would be fine and whatever. But like there was always this element of, oh, this is how you do well. And I don't think, there aren't many agencies left like this. They're still out there. So you can still find them if you want to work in places like this. But a lot of places are a little bit more sensitive to this kind of stuff now, which I think is a good move. And this is Sarah talking about masking at university, which I think is an interesting topic.
Usually I'll have to introduce different like inflections to make things sound more positive or negative. So usually I just have like a more of a flat tone to things. And sometimes that can sound more critical than I'm meaning to be. So sometimes during crit, I would alter my pitch a little bit to sound more encouraging. So I'd be up here more than I was actually down here where my natural voice is.
Oh, wow. So that's masking essentially, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is masking.
Yeah.
So to the point where people outside of my classes had no idea that I was like exhausted most of the time and that my voice was this low.
Wow. Gosh. But are there situations where you just feel completely comfortable to be yourself and
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. As you get further, I think, into your program at art school, you mask less and less and less because you actually know the people that you're working with a lot of the time. Like, there was only 30 of us.
Oh, nice.
So you really know everyone's faces, you know your professors. You like meet people and then you hang out with them. There's been definitely so many situations where he just not wear a huge mask.
But one of the things, I'm only going to talk about the one in here because I'm looking at the time, but is RSD. I suffer from RSD, which is rejection sensitivity disorder. So when I overthink how people interact with me quite a lot and I read into things quite deeply. And so quite often when people are really direct and really upfront in crits, I would take it really, really personally. And I'd go home and it would just mull over in my head over all weekend. And so sometimes these neurodivergent things, they kind of clash with each other a little bit as well. I'll probably talk about something after this, but I'll let her talk.
For me, it's quite difficult when you've got like quite bad anxiety in design because a lot of design is about like selling your ideas and like being confident enough in like your, whether you're like concepting or you design something, being able to like fully back that and stand behind that. Which is something that is quite difficult sometimes when you're like anxious and like overthinking. Especially so like the big agency I used to work at, it was just like, it was so not a right fit for someone like me who's like really anxious. Because it was so sort of like big, you don't get to know people you're working with that well. Like I made really good friends, but it was mainly like sort of like other like juniors and people of my level, but like sort of the design directors and like the people managing each project, never really got to know them that much. So I always like, when I had to present work to them, I felt like a level of like anxiety and sort of like tension and not feeling confident enough to just sort of really go for it. And I think that sort of held me back quite a lot. Especially as well, like what would often happen is like, you'd be like concepting something and you'd think of an idea and you'd be like, oh no, that's stupid. Like people are going to think you're really stupid to show that. Like that's just not, and you've like talk yourself out of it. And then you're in like the meeting, there's a few other people on that project and they show basically what you thought of and everyone loves it. And you just sat there like, I had that, but I talked myself out of it. And that was like, that's quite frustrating. You have to kind of learn to like try and push through that, but it's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think everybody who's been a designer for a while recognizes that, by the way. That happens so often in the design industry. One of the best bits of advice I was ever given was to pretend I'm the most confident person in the room. And that changed my career completely. I used to like be really, really cautious about presenting ideas. From that moment onwards, when Bruce told me that, Bruce Duckworth, he told me just to pretend I'm the most confident person. That was the last piece of advice he gave me when I left. And I went into my next job and basically everything just went through. I was like straight through to client meetings. And then I once got asked like, how am I so confident? I was like, I'm just not that confident. And nobody believed me. Like the juniors in one of my roles, they just didn't believe me. They just thought, but I was just pretending, and it worked. Yes, crits are always going to be scary. Crits, that never goes away, I think. Sometimes they're competitive, like Jess has talked about when she was in an agency where she was with lots of lads, and it was quite a competitive environment, and she'd quite often sit back. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but quite often sit back and like not say anything until the last moment, and then like all of the ideas were already on the table. And it was like they'd just fight to get their ideas in, which is tricky. But there are like, yeah, I think it's important to remember when you become in that leadership role, or even just in your current role as students, to nurture a kind of safer environment for each other, talk to each other and support each other, and also help people to learn new things as well. You're there as much as we're there to support each other. And the more you do that, the more safe everybody feels. I think that's just good to know. Yeah, and also separate your work from your personality. When people are creating your work, they're not creating who you are as a person. I still haven't learned this lesson, by the way, but yeah, this is a good one to learn if you can learn it. So yeah, this is a tricky one. I am sharing the negative stuff as well, but yeah, this is Ali.
So in my previous role, that was where I was when I got my diagnosis, and I kind of blindly went into it being, as I always have been my whole life, very open, like very much like you. We'll talk about anything, overshare at the best of times. Like, you know, that's just who I am as a person, and I always have been. So I felt safe to share from the get-go, so I did. And that didn't go so well, unfortunately, in that occasion. It seemed to at the start. They seemed very supportive and very kind of like, you know, was very open with people sharing. I did like a talk to the whole business across like the LA, New York, like UK studios and things like that. And yes, they seemed to be supportive initially, but then I think it's easy to be supportive of difference when things are going well. Where you'll really see whether a company is inclusive is when things might not be going so well. And that's sort of what my experience was, where I was signed off work because I had a lot going on in my personal life. There was just a real shift in the way that they were kind of viewing me. And I did understand, like my creative director, like we'd worked together at previous role at Taxi as well. And so I think what they struggled with was there's like an element of when you get late diagnosed is downskilling, in the sense of like recognizing things that you find challenging and trying to honor your boundaries and actually just hold your hands up and say, I really struggle with this. And I think they really struggled to see me as a disabled person, as did I. It took me some time, to be honest, but ultimately, yeah, they really struggled to perceive me as that. So I think ultimately, you know, as I kind of returned to work, I was grieving. I'd been caring for someone who had terminal bowel cancer. So, you know, I kind of was back at work, you know, within days of her dying, like it, you know, and I was expected to just like maintain performance. And, you know, then I was put on a informal performance improvement plan, and pretty much everything on that improvement plan was ADHD, autistic traits, like, you know, which I knew was discrimination, like.
So yeah, the positive side of this is that she ended up somewhere amazing, but it's just recognizing when you're in a place that isn't your right environment. And I think you've got to remember that, like, I leave jobs too easily. I find it very easy to leave a job, and I've done it a lot of times. some people kind of feel like they're stuck somewhere. And it's really nice that she didn't feel stuck and she just moved on, but to a much better place. She's very, very happy now. And this is Brett talking about Lego, which is a much more progressive company.
But yeah, I think it's just important to know that kind of, I think not to kind of overgeneralize, but in the creative industry, like a lot of people are neurodivergent, I think. And a lot of people definitely who I've come across are also lovely people. So I think, yeah, I think it's important, like if you feel comfortable, and I think, as I said earlier, it's kind of like, you don't always have to, I think, disclose your diagnosis, I think, or your suspected diagnosis if you haven't been diagnosed yet. But I think just kind of advocating for yourself in those situations throughout your day to day, and kind of letting people know how you work and your preferred ways of working and challenging things is always really good. But again, I get that that's difficult if you are kind of in a new role and you are kind of new to the industry. But yeah, I think nowadays it's becoming a big topic, I think, across kind of lots of industries and stuff. So it's definitely being spoken about a lot more.
And this is Melin talking about Melin runs a UX business, where it managed quite a large team.
Absolutely, yeah. It helped me own my strengths and be able to be clear and open about my weaknesses. Because I think that's really important. Like I said, I know we're expected to be good at every stage, but I think you come to a point in your career and you know your strengths. And now that I'm in a leadership position, there's no need for me to pretend that I'm really good at attention to detail and I can't ever make a mistake, because I can. So I think it's better for me to own it and get help and ask my colleagues to be like, I have written this, and they, can you just check it for mistakes? And actually also realize, so I still make mistakes, right? Because there are times that I forget to ask a colleague to read it. I forget to edit something before sending it off, and then I pay the price for it.
So it's really nice to hear somebody who runs an agency and talking about how they still make mistakes. I just think that's nice I think that's great personally. And then also about appearances being they can be quite deceptive. So, this is again, Emily talking about this.
One of the good things that were there was they did have like a mentorship thing where you'd get paired up with like a more senior member of the team as like someone you could like chat to more casually. And I luckily got someone who's really, really lovely, and who actually did like check in and we'd have chats, and they did chat with her about it and just be like, yeah, I got sort of like anxiety, blah blah, and that helped sort of chat to her.
Yeah.
That's the only time really.
Yeah.
I'm quite like, I'm probably a bit too open about it. Just because like, it's just been a part of my personality for so long. I remember, actually that was interesting. I was chatting to someone who I'd just met at my old place. I think she said to me like, oh, you seem very chill. And I just not really thinking, I was like, oh, do I? I was like, oh, like medicated for anxiety. That sounds like really, I don't know why, like, I feel the need to tell people this. But they were really surprised by that. And
Yeah, anyway, because it is invisible. It's not a visible thing. So you never quite know what's going on in someone's head. This is just really quickly to show you like the typical structure of maybe a small agency. But you'll have friends across all different places in this area. And it's like, I love that you can kind of like make all of these different connections, and you can be quite honest with certain people, and where you can't be honest. And there's a big community when you work in an agency or a company. And I had friends in one of my places that were from all sorts of departments, which I just thought was quite nice anyway. Yeah, so things are changing in the industry. This is Ben again talking about the progressive culture at JKR.
We have a thriving, I would say, like Slack community at JKR. Like we're constantly.
By the way, Slack is, if anybody doesn't know, is like a kind of messaging platform where all the people in the company are connected to each other.
We have a thriving, I would say, like Slack community at JKR. Like we're constantly like messaging each other. We've got, and not just about work, which I think is really key. We've got like Slack channels for just about everything. We've got a Slack Slack channel about gaming. We've got Slack channel about films and books. And every year we have like Great British Bake Off sweepstakes and like football channels. Like a huge part of the JKR community is now like centered on Slack. We have one of our creative directors is known as the person who makes custom emojis. Like everyone has a custom emoji. Mine's a little Lego figurehead from when I worked on a Lego pitch. And it's built a culture around a digital first. And then everybody, even if you're online from home or if you're online in the office, most of our comms daily are happening through Slack.
Cool.
I don't think it's unique to JKR, but I think without tooting my own horn, they've got quite a vocal neurodiverse member on like the DE&I council in me, and I'm publishing articles, and I think I mentioned I'm going to go be a panelist in LA in October for AIGA.
That sounds sick.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm still a little bit frightened because it's like, oh my God, I'm going to America again. But I think like at this point in my career, it's my duty to make sure that the door is open and like say and get what is needed for neurodiverse creatives in the space. Because for a long time, the model was, this is how we act as an agency and you just have to do it. You have to do it this way. COVID opened the doors to making everybody see in a very visceral way, actually, the way of working is mutable. It can change and it will change. So there's really no excuse for an agency or any industry going, we do it like this and there's no room for negotiation. There's no room for space. Because the answer is, well, that's just a lie. Because the moment COVID happened, everybody had to react to it. Everybody had to change their ways of working. So why can we not like talk about that if it is in the vein of getting someone to work at their absolute best?
Cool. I'm hoping that I'm not too late, but I'm going to whiz through some.
Actually, the creative industries does actually almost enable us to hide a little bit, neurodivergent people, because, we're sort of like thinking differently obviously it sets us apart from everyone else. Is one of my greatest skill sets, I would say, is that I will look at a problem in a completely different way to other people, and and that's great when we're in the business of selling ideas ultimately. So yeah, that's worked in my favor. But yeah, there are things and I guess being quirky and a bit weird and a bit obsessive again is all really positive stuff. I've got a huge collection of ampersands. I did my degree in typography and I obsessed with typography. And so, it's I think, again, because typography was my special interest. So again, it served me well in my career. But yeah, so I just think it does lend itself very well to neurodivergence. And I do think that's why we see that increased amount, 50 to 60% within. And I definitely look around at my peers or think back to people I've worked with in the past, and I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. I can just see it, and yeah, it's really interesting, when you think about it like that.
I love that she doesn't ever really finish a sentence. She just moves on to the next sentence. I just like that way of communicating. Great.
We had no care for children, students' mental well-being. So I've gone through some stuff with family, and I was because I've badly with my best friend from my class said I used to cry every day, and I remember I probably couldn't have finished uni if it wasn't for her support, just because I just didn't have anyone, I didn't know how to deal with things, and we didn't have that support. So let the students know they're in a really better times than we do. Because they can at least be I had depression. We couldn't do that.
Which is an observation. I know that we're saying, things used to be more difficult in the past, and we always say that, but things are better now, and there are some really huge changes that have happened. I hear of change every time I talk to anybody in the industry, and this is quite common. if more diagnoses mean there's going to be better support in work environments, but also in the universities. People more protected by unions and conversations with HR and stuff like that than ever before. And there are also more services again. Melon didn't have this in 2004. And so use those things, because she could have had a slightly different kind of direction in her career if she'd maybe solved some of these tricky things early. This is a lovely bit of advice from Bretty. So I'm just going to play it.
Yeah, again, I think it just comes down to that, your openness and kind of willingness to understand these things. I think it's kind of, and not everyone knows the answers to all the questions that might get asked, or kind of no one knows everything, like myself included, like kind of working for all these things. There's a lot that I don't fully understand or kind of am aware of yet, but I think just having that openness to listen, and I think just realizing that everyone is different, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. I think it's, yeah, everyone's brains works in different ways. Everyone's kind of day to day can look completely different. So I think just having that kind of, yeah, again, understanding is brilliant. I think as long as the work gets done, then how it's done and kind of if it's done at different kind of pace or style than you would normally do, I think just be an open stance, celebrating it. I think it's brilliant to see kind of people working in different ways. And yeah, I have that a lot kind of where I am. That's, you just see people kind of wandering off or like doing something kind of completely unrelated to their work, but you know they're working, like in their head, they're kind of going for a problem, they're trying to work something out. It could be like a potential idea, but I'm just allowing space for those ideas and processes to flow is just really important.
Yeah, nice bit of advice. When I worked at Ted Baker, this was the cafe downstairs, and I spent. You weren't allowed at Ted Baker to work away from your desk, and you weren't allowed to be late. You weren't allowed to put your coat on the back of your chair. There were loads of really weird rules, and they were all enforced by the person who ran the company, Ray Kelvin, who turned out to be a bit of a monster, but he quite liked me, so I got away with absolute murder. This is where I would work every day, and all of my team were always like, "Where's Jamie?" And I'd just be down here, or I'd be sitting with the cutting team or the fabric designers, or I'd be just chatting to everyone, but constantly kind of working through stuff and kind of solving problems in my head, having conversations about different things. And that's kind of my process. And it's now something that kind of my managers, Glenn and Dave and Martin, they all kind of understand that, I hope, about me, because I'm never working in the office. I'm like working anywhere. Like today I worked in DSR. I just work anywhere. I work in cafes or work all over the place. I found some rooms in Bank Plain, which are just like, there's like weird little offices in the ceiling, which I love working in, because there's these glass rooms and no one goes up there. And I just go and work in there for hours at a time. So just like, I like to find my own environment, and my own environment changes every single day, but just so happened that was my environment for the entire time I worked there. So yeah, this is just really quick. We're nearly at the end of this actually now, but I started this process in July and I got really excited about the project. Within a week, I had 10 interviews lined up and I was like, oh, this is so good. And I kind of did this whole process. This was the bit I loved. And I was like, just doing all the interviews. And in the first month of doing interviews, I was like, this is so cool, so much fun. Then in the second month of interviews, I was like, I'm a bit bored now, but I had to keep going, but the students are going to like this. So I just need to keep pushing through. And I was like, oh, I have to do it. It became a little bit of a chore, but it was still fun. It was over my holidays as well. And I was trying to do our bathroom at the same time. And then in October, I was like, nothing. No, I didn't even think about it. And I was like, oh, and it kept being in the back of my head going, oh, it's kind of getting a bit stressful. And then it got to November and I was like, I have to put this fucking thing together. Like, I've got 5 days. And I just went, this is the kind of way that I work. And I recognize that the beginning and the end of a project are incredible to me. And then this moment in the middle where I'm just like, oh, I can't be bothered. And a lot of people I've spoken to in the neurodivergent community, like, really recognize this. And it's like, it's not just neurodivergent people, but it is something that we have to be aware of. I think it's quite funny. So these are just a couple of slides of like why I've put this together. I want you guys to feel seen, even if you're not neurodivergent. I want you to kind of notice that you've been seen, like you're not being ignored. This is something that we feel quite strongly about. We talk about it a lot in our office, and it's something we're always trying to improve. And I want you to have hope for where you're going. You're all going to end up in somewhere at some point. And I hope you've now realized that it's a vibrant community of lots of different people. And that's quite empowering, I think, to know that you're going into somewhere that's probably one of the more neurodiverse industries. Like if you were going into another industry, it's going to be much lower, maybe more typical to what society is, 15 to 20%. And know that even though you might not feel capable because you've got all of these other complex things going on, everyone I know who is neurodivergent has done quite well. So it's just worth remembering that. Yeah, you're entering an industry where there isn't a mold. Like nobody is the same. Everybody's got stories. Everybody's different. And there's not like a stereotypical designer. In fact, I think the stereotypical designer is kind of just a bit different. And I think that's quite a nice thing to think about. Yeah, all of these people didn't mask their way to the top. They didn't kind of pretend that they weren't normal. They just kind of like, they were quite open about it, and they still managed to do really, really well in their careers, which it's just about working out when you talk about these things and how often and who you talk to them about. And it's kind of like judging where you are and trying to work out when to talk about these things. And you are, I just made this term up, but you're the improvement generation, apparently in my head, but you're the generation that has already made quite a big impact on the creative industry. And you're the people who are going to make these changes. When you're running companies, you're going to be the people who make decisions on what the culture of this place is going to be like, and essentially what the culture of the design industry is. So just remember these things and try to build that when you're in that position, because it's important. And being different is why we are good at stuff. I think creatives, not just neurodivergent people, creative people in general are different. And quite often our friends at school might have said, oh, we're the kind of weird ones and whatever. And maybe you all didn't get it. I got that a lot. And I still get it a lot. And but we don't think like marketing. Marketing think in very linear ways. We don't think like them. That's why they enjoy our way of working. We don't think like managers. Managers are about kind of like ticking boxes and making sure that things work. Not these managers, but like managers in like Unilever, which you're going to work with Unilever. Most of you at some point might come across them because they own loads of stuff. And they're really boring people, really, really boring people. Call them suits, which is, yeah, the term for them. And board members, like board members run the companies behind the scenes. We're nothing like those. I mean, they're usually quite interesting. I've met our board members for the uni and they're lovely, but they're usually kind of quite static, is the only way I can think of them. And the creatives aren't very static. And then this is just David Bowie. This is the last thing I'll show. I think I interviewed him for this, by the way. Oh no, he's dead, but it was a long time ago. But yeah, and I didn't put the music in the background. I would have put David Bowie in the background probably, but I didn't put this weird Inception background. But anyway, so this is him talking. I think this is how I'll leave it.
Just remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself, but you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. The other thing I would say is that if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place, but it's something exciting.
Pretty cool. Anyway, yeah, that's all I've got. Cool.